is Joey, and today I will be going over a tier list of what I thought about the poems that we read in class this semester. I didn't want this video to take too long, so I only decided to rank the lyric poems or shorter poems that we read that mostly stuck to a rhyme scheme. So the list of the shorter poems we read this semester are The Wife's Lament, The Wanderer, All Monsieur's Departure, The Lie, Farewell to False Love, Friendship's Mystery to My Dearest Lucatia, To Mrs. M.A. at Parting, A Married State, Upon the Double Murder of King Charles I, Upon Nothing, Love and Life, A Song, The Mock Song, and The Imperfect Enjoyment. So up first, I will go over the poems that I thought ranked in the S tier. The first poem that I put in S tier is the Old English poem, The Wanderer. The Wanderer is a poem about profound loneliness and emotion from a man facing exile. This poem is filled with heavy metaphors and imagery describing the man's thoughts as he faces his exile alone and contemplates the purpose of man. I think this belongs in S tier because of how deeply introspective it is and how much the wanderer is caring about his surroundings. The second poem that I believe belongs in S tier is Catherine Phillips' poem To Mrs. M.A. at Parting. This is a poem about platonic love between Phillips and her dear friend Rosanna, who are parting ways but their souls remain coalesced into one. I rank this poem in S tier because I believe it expresses such a deep emotional bond between these two people. Even if they're not together physically, the two friends will always remain together in spirit. The next rank below S tier will be the A tier poems. The first poem I've put in the A tier is Sir Walter Raleigh's A Farewell to False Love. I thought that this poem ranked pretty high on the list because I really did like the comparative metaphor Raleigh uses to describe the ending of the speaker's love and relationship and what kind of lies came to an end along with the relationship itself. The next poem that I have ranked in the A tier is Catherine Phillips' poem Friendship's Mystery to My Dearest Lucatia. This poem is a beautiful representation of Phillips's thoughts on female friendships and how she thought it was a truly divine and spiritual experience. While this poem is written beautifully, for some reason I still do think that To Mrs. M.A. at Parting was a little bit above it, just because it was written on a deeper level and portrays a much more thoughtful emotion. The last poem that I thought belongs in A tier is Queen Elizabeth's poem On Monsieur's Departure. This poem is speaking about an unrequited love and the conflicting emotions that come along with this circumstance. For how short the poem is, I do really love how Queen Elizabeth is able to portray such frustrating emotions. This poem also does give us a personal insight into the Queen's personal life, which I do think is really cool to think about. The next rank below the A tier is going to be the B tier poems. The first poem that I've ranked in the B tier is the Old English poem The Wife's Lament. This poem is about a woman who is living in exile in what seems to be a cave as she is separated from her husband. This poem portrays a deep sense of longing and sorrow as the woman waits for her husband. As deep as the emotions are in this poem, I felt like there is a level of ambiguity and kind of vagueness, and it kind of covers an amount of context needed in order for me to fully resonate with the poem's meaning. Next poem I have ranked in B tier would be Upon Nothing by John Wilmot. This poem critiques human existence by personifying the concept of nothing and using it to define both the creation and destruction of the concept. I think that Wilmot does a great job at critiquing the philosophical aspects of nothingness, but ultimately I kind of think that his writing style fell short for me and the personification of the multiple concepts became a little bit repetitive in my opinion. The next rank is going to be the C tier poems. The first poem I've put in C tier is A Married State by Catherine Phillips. This poem is a cautionary tale warning women not to get married. Phillips herself was forced to marry a man much older than her when she was only 16, which I do think is what motivated this poem's message. While I do find the poem to be creative, I think that the poem was pretty short and simple, which is valuable in its own way, but it doesn't really compare to the artistic abilities of the other poems that I've ranked higher. The next poem in C tier is another Catherine Phillips, her poem titled Upon the Double Murder of King Charles I. I thought that Phillips did a very good job writing this poem, and it had a lot of passion and empathy towards King Charles, but I kind of didn't really like the poem because of her strict loyalty to the royalist family and the way that she completely villainized the parliament in the poem. I did like the metaphor she used, but I don't really resonate with the poem artistically. The next category is going to be the D tier poems. The only poem I've put in D tier is Sir Walter Raleigh's poem, The Lie. This poem is a political critique that loathes the hypocrisy of the church and the royal court. This poem does a good job in critiquing this kind of society, but much like Wilmot's Upon Nothing poem, I found The Lie to get a little repetitive and very preachy, and I kind of feel like towards the end, Rayleigh acts like he knows everything. The next category is going to be the E tier. The first poem I've put in E tier is John Wilmot's poem Love and Life, a Song. The poem is about the speaker spending time with their lover and realizing that the present is all that matters. I rank this in E tier because it seems like Wilmot is stating in the poem that nothing else matters except the present, which is kind of absolving him from what he's done in the past and what he will do in the future. When you look past the poem's rhyme scheme, I don't really think this poem holds much creative value other than commenting on present lust. The next poem in E tier is John Wilmot's The Mock Song. This poem is about the speaker wanting to sleep with a woman who goes by the hypothetical name Phyllis, but she already sleeps with many other men, which makes the speaker jealous. I rank this poem pretty low because the speaker kind of makes fun of the woman for sleeping with so many men, and the poem is rather blunt, and I don't think it's very creative in a lot of ways. Finally, the last poem I have ranked in F tier is going to be The Imperfect Enjoyment by John Wilmot. This story is about a man who essentially berates himself after a failed sexual encounter and then ruminates on his frustrations with both his physical limitations and his unfulfilled desires. While the poem is pretty progressive by exploring the sexual failure of a man instead of the sexual conquest, I still think that the poem is pretty chaotic and not very artistically written. With this being said, I don't really think the poem holds much value and wasn't very entertaining either. And that will be my full ranked list of the shorter poems that we read this semester from S tier to F tier. Thank you guys very much for watching.